Good. So, are there
Greetings,
so
everyone. It is the 7th of December, and this is the final Content Evolution New World call for 2023. It's not the last.
Well,
we will,
bonsai.
we will start up again next year. This is our holiday. That guy was saying, here's Holiday Mouse. Okay, here to help celebrate with me. I glue him to my shoulder, but then I said that would look like character out of the Men in Black, right? Movies. I said, I don't think I'm going to do that. We're delighted to have Dan Ness here from San Diego. Dan is a relative newcomer, all right, to this group, although he was a regular on our COVID calls, right? And we kind of stopped doing that and then bridged over to this. So, Dan, everything good in San Diego?
Things are well. Yesterday I got a call from a client who's a short timer. She's retiring after 30 years, and she's been a client for that long. And so, Kevin, for you to call me a newcomer, just keep it coming. I like it.
I know. Exactly. All right. The La Fuente de la Juventud, the fountain of youth. All right, in language. There
right.
We go. Well, we're glad you're here. Dan, by the way, for everybody, it runs the longest running technology tracker for how people adopt and use new tech, right? And
you've got it.
So he's he's got a company down in San Diego. He is a former ThinkPad Advisory Council member and just an overall good guy. We like to go get fish tacos when we're together in San Diego because it is the home of that good food. I see Stuart Noyce, you have joined. Sharon Osen, delighted to have you with us. Elsie, and some of our regulars, Mark, Bruce, Mac. We're coming up on this was a really interesting year. So we welcome your voices. Let's hit some highlights, not necessarily just New World, but how things have shaped up for you. Stuart, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. How is the world treating Stuart Noyce? We haven't heard from him for a while. Happy holiday.
Thank you very, very much. I have been away, as they say in New England. I've been away. My parents were in a bad car accident, so I flew to Dallas, Texas, and stayed with them for basically 3 months. And during that time, I got a up close and personal look at the healthcare industry of the United States. And so they're an older couple, and now as I come back, now that they're basically back to where they were 3 months ago, I'm home, and I'm giving myself a little bit of a change of perspective. I'm excited about not just AI, which I was before, but I'm now really excited about its potential for revolutionizing healthcare, but and medicine, particularly medications, particularly diagnosis and care, but also just taking care of the medical records that are shared by all the different primary care physicians and specialists and et cetera. So that's where I'm at, and I'm really starting to look now at product positions and product opportunities, places where I can use my skills as a product manager and marketer to work on the just the basic problem of healthcare. Healthcare is 1/6 of our GDP, and it shouldn't be anywhere close to that.
Yeah.
Plenty.
Well, I can
of
tell
work
you one
to do.
thing. I had a similar experience when Heidi was in the hospital. Now, a couple of years back, watching people with the instrumentation that was in her room. She was there for a little over a month, and they'd look at something and then they go back to a screen and do inputs. And I said, guys, I looked at the back of some of these machines, and they're all Bluetooth enabled. Why aren't you just sucking this information out of the machine in there? Just, and they said, they're, they don't like, even that kind of transfer protocol. So we have to look at it and put the data in. We spend 70% of our time with our face in front of a screen, Mr. Clark. And I said, that's got to stop. We need to invert that. Okay. You need to be spending 70% of your time with the patients.
No, it's so,
you've got the
it's so,
technology and you're not using it. Right? It was very frustrating, but
yeah, it's very, very frustrating. And we need people to be fewer, we need fewer technicians and more people really focused on the person. And the technology should just be in the background so that you know immediately what's going on with the person. There's still quite a few things that they don't really understand completely. And you use the data to get better understanding, and more research comes from having the data and looking at it and doing tests. And that's all great. But at the end of the day, when I walk into a room, I don't want to spend 20 minutes setting up another health record for them.
Yeah.
Which may or may not be accurate, or they have something like, your father has atrial fibrillation. It took me 2 months to find out that no, he doesn't. And you should take him off all these meds because he doesn't have what they're there for. And that's the kind of thing that just really frustrated me.
So we're delighted that they're in better shape now.
Thank you.
We're really happy for that. We're going to go back to uplifting conversation if we can. Hello, Mike McGuire. Glad to see you joining us. We're getting an update from Stuart, and his parents are doing better. How are you out on the Silicon Valley? Good work?
Doing great. A little chilly this morning. Good day to stay in and get some writing done this morning, I'd say. But generally speaking, doing really well.
You must have gone into flow state.
Plans are being made.
7 minutes after the hour, you went into flow state and just came up, right?
No, I had that issue I occasionally have with those audio systems I have, Kevin, where I couldn't hear anything out of any headphones on anything. So, you don't see the sweat, but I was a little sweaty the last 10 minutes.
There you go. Well, we're glad you're with us. I see another familiar face smiling right now. Sharon Osen, how are you? We're glad you're with us. And how has 2023 been for you?
Well, I am glad to be back. I have it's been a really different year. I've spent I've missed this call for the last, I don't know how many, mostly because I've been doing some roles as outsourced operational roles as a chief marketing, chief revenue officer. And so with ongoing meetings, it was really kind of challenging to be part of the group, but I'm so glad to be back. I think the last discussion that I heard on AI was really very inspirational. And I'm super excited about it. And I do want to actually kind of speak about what Stuart was just mentioning. One of the other clients I have more recently is in the medical device area, really trying to help patients in the ICU who are typically now being restrained, which was a whole area that I was not aware of previously. And I'm really interested in this intersection of healthcare devices, AI, as a new area of focus for me. So I'm excited to learn more about it, and I'm happy to be back in the group.
Well, we're delighted
to have you. I do have to leave for another meeting, but I wanted to make sure I at least.
Well, it's a good thing I called on you early on before you went poof,
you.
And went away. So we're glad you're here, and we're looking forward to catching up when you're ready for a one-on-one.
Great.
So Mac Turner, you're in Charlotte. You've been a regular. How's the year ending for Mac?
Quietly. It's been an interesting year. It's been very interesting to follow, as we've discussed frequently on this call, the development and rapid evolution of AI and generative AI. Had a good conversation with an executive in the music industry yesterday concerning whether AI is seen as the next musical instrument or a threat. And that has been one of the major highlights and high points of the year, is watching that evolve. Other than that, we are ready for the holidays.
All right. Let me tell you something, a feature of the Clark household. You can't see around this corner, and I'm not going to try to change the camera, but if I did, you would see, our Christmas tree is up.
Ready.
And it has been up since COVID. We never took it down because it was our, inspiration tree, right? And then, Heidi was sick, and I said, we need that year round. We don't need that, we need to be able to flip that switch and turn on those lights and feel good. So it's still here, right? But I'm flipping the switch more often, right, at this time of year. But it's there. It's decorated to the nines. It's great. Mike, we have one of our recent guest speakers on. Martin, how are you, my friend? How is the year ending for Martin Vilso, the Martin Vilso team at Insight, and the Martin Vilso dancers? All right, we want to know how things are going.
Yeah, it's it's ending pretty good. I think we're really busy. I'm sitting in the airport in Dulles right now, flying back to Raleigh. I was at the Danish embassy Christmas party last night, so the ambassador
Well, it's
invited
probably
me
a lot
up,
more
so.
fun than what you're doing right now at this party, but it's all right. They probably served more good stuff to eat. Right?
Yeah, no, there was a lot of interesting people, and it was a good event. So so that's all good, and I think yeah, now I've been through a lot on the personal side with moving to Raleigh and all that from Denmark, and that's all settled. And I've managed to buy a house, so we'll do closing on the 20th of December. So
Yay!
that would be good
Congratulations.
in North Raleigh. And then from a business perspective, I think there's just so much going on right now that it's really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to that in the next year to see how we can churn out all these opportunities. And also maybe explore some of the topics that we encounter in this group as well down the road. So,
Hey, Martin, short of becoming a citizen of this country, being a property owner is the next best thing. All right, so
yeah.
There you go. All right, we're happy for that. Mike, Martin's talk about risk was really interesting this year, and I'm still thinking. Takeaway from the year is the riskiest thing that you can do is not taking a risk.
Well, that's a great point, Kevin. I was thinking of Martin and that discussion we had. Actually, I was wondering if he was going to be on. I'd read it last night, the news stories around how venture capitalists are now not as willing to take risks. They're now shutting down a lot of their firms that haven't come close to hitting the number. I think, it used to be if you invest in 10, 2 come through. I guess now it's if you invest in 30, maybe 2 or 3 come through. And I just wonder, you could say that's just, bookkeeping, tightening up the books. I just wondered, Martin, if you were, are you seeing, not that I'm asking you to comment on the entire venture community, but it seems like right now in particular, they're, what was the old line a guy I worked for said, there seems to be no adventure in venture capital right now. And I don't know if that's something you're seeing as well. It seems like you guys have weathered that kind of initial phase pretty well, but are you seeing a kind of a similar retrenchment or fear from making bets anymore?
I think there's some of it. But I also think there's so many opportunities out there that you got to be really careful, right? To Kevin's point, if you don't take risk, then you will die, right? And I think some of it has to clean up a bit and clean up the books. But right now, I think if people start to be more conservative and not invest as much, that's actually where the opportunities they start, right? Right. So it's something about really monitoring what's going on, what are the opportunities out there, and then maybe a little bit more selective, but they still have to go after it and invest, right?
I think in the VC world, if I were to do the diagnostic, is I think the venture capitalists themselves are not shy right now in terms of looking at this as being a fertile moment. it's what's behind, right? The family offices that they get the money from are kind of bewildered, right? And so the flow of money from the family office into the VC firms, that's what's dried up, right? And so they don't have as much to invest, and therefore, you know, they look at their flow and their throughput and say, you know, we're not going to look as many proposals because, you know, we're going to invest the same amount of time, right, for the portfolio management, and we don't have the funds to invest, right? So somehow you have to go back into the value chain and get the family offices and the wealthy individuals to want to, you know, start to put their money in the hands of others, right? The other phenomenon in that world is that some of those family offices are looking at bypassing, you know, those funds and doing the investments directly, right? Because they say, okay, well, we're capable of doing this. We know where we want to put our bets. So, you know, we're going to bypass the middle person and get involved directly. So it's interesting. It's lots of change, right? Underway in those worlds. Elsie Mayo is from Santa Fe, right? And I only say that because she told me in chat where she is, right? How are you? Another voice and face that we haven't seen in a while. What's going on?
Oh, what's going on?
Holidays.
Nice to see you. Happy holidays. Thanks for the invitation to this holiday party.
Yeah,
this is my first holiday party
festive.
of the season.
You got a holiday party. You know, the mouse says you look festive, right? What can I say?
You gave me the opportunity here. You said holiday party. I'm there. This is the first one of the season. So I'm here in Santa Fe, New Mexico for essentially my annual infusion of heart energy and beauty. On a swing from California with clients. And you posed a question earlier, how was 2023? And so I quickly took a look back. 2023 for me was finally a resurgence of energy and mojo, and in me and clients, starting in the spring. And what I'm finding, if there's a thread here, it's kind of like a resuscitation of a lot of very solid market positioning of different clients, of assets that were kind of latent and slumbering and are ready to reposition. I mean, that's what they're calling for now. Recognizing that maybe it's part of the lag coming out of the pandemic, but it's also with all of the constant change and flux in the world, a commitment. The risk of repositioning doesn't feel so great anymore. It feels more like a necessity to them.
Sure.
And I'm excited about it because, you know, there's a greater sense of the value of making a contribution to the world, the need to integrate that with more traditional forms of growth. So I'm here partly on vacation, partly starting to learn about this movement called Compassionate Cities, of which Santa Fe signed on a while ago, and I'm curious to see what they've done with it. But I'm just learning about that as an area of interest too.
Okay. If there is a paper, a book, a website that you think describes Compassionate Cities, put it in the chat. That sounds interesting, you know, worth bookmarking and following up on, Elsie. Interesting stuff. For those of you who are at the Content Evolution gathering in San Francisco, you have my thanks for coming out. Mike was there. We heard from Stuart. Stuart was there. Mark Prinsky was there. Mark, all right, we're glad that you have been a regular on these calls. How is the year concluding for you? Sans a trip to India, right?
Well, I'll get to that in a second, but the first thing I want to say is how grateful I am for this group. and for everybody here that that was a big feature. This group and all the people involved in it and its outreaches were a big positive factor in my life in 2023. And I met a lot of people and I got a lot of help and I got into some things. I just made a couple of chat GPTs. And so I'm very happy. Right now I'm in this strange state in that I had invested a lot of my energy into going to India for 3 or 4 weeks. And I didn't get a visa at the last minute for reasons we can talk about. But now I'm trying to figure out, one, how to recuperate that, because I still think India is a great opportunity for doing new things, and it's so huge. And second, what I do instead, with the time, which is I think going to focus on my book and rewriting it and getting it out there. So again, if anybody has any suggestions for a new title, people told me the cover was bad. So I was happy that I got Joe Kowalik to design me a new cover. That's one of the things I'm thankful for, Jim Kowalik, and I'm so that worked out. But it's still, I missed AI when I wrote the book because it was a year early. So now I want to update the book for the AI being in the world, or generative AI particularly being in the world. And so I'm looking for a new title. As I mentioned earlier, I'm considering AI natives and then some subtitle. If anybody has any suggestions, please let me know. But in general, it's been a very good year for me, and a lot thanks to you.
Yeah, one suggestion that I would make, Mark, is this could just be kind of at the end of what you originally wrote and are updating, is have some other voices, interview some other people, all right, and then have kind of a collection of people that you are finding are simpatico with your point of view, or even people who disagree. All right, that's okay too. All right, Minority Report. There's an outlier, so that you get some variety of perspectives as you do this. Then you can put an epilogue that says, here's kind of the journey that I've been on, and I'm grateful that I've met these other people and their voices. So
yeah, you've suggested that before, and it's a good idea. Thank you.
All right. Bruce Parks, Sacramento, another regular. Delighted that you're with us, and thank you for that coffee concentrate. I finally got into it. It's good.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Kevin. No, things are well here in Sacramento, as it is. As it is with Mike. It's been a bit of a drizzly, rather cool day, so we're not too far apart from where Mike lives. But this year has been an interesting one. Trying to bring a product to market and refine it as we do it. It's a real challenge, and so it's been a very interesting journey. You learn a lot as you try to create things and build them and modify them and bring them to market. And so in that respect, it's been a great year, and I'm very, very thankful for the input that I've gotten from Mike and from you, Kevin, and from Jim Sporer. So thanks. I really do appreciate that.
100%. Mike, remember Dan? Of course you know Dan, right? Dan, let's have pretend like Mike is still over at Gartner, right? For a second, right? So if you were going to, be up on stage, at one of the Gartner fests, if they would invite you, all right? But that would be a good idea, but who knows? What has been the most interesting technology adoption that you've seen recently that either didn't meet your expectations in terms of where it went, or because we had a voice tech adoption call, right? Noting that it's bombing in business, right? The adoption is like nothing, right? They're losing money at home, but I have a couple of Alexas running around the house, right? So what are you tracking in terms of tech adoption that you think we ought to know about?
Well, it's like a low rumble. You know, it's not just one little area.
Okay, all right.
Flops about. I guess you could call them flops. I think it looks like, as I look around the Zoom room, I see that there's probably a lot of experience here. So we some of us might remember, the year of the LAN. We might think about 5G. There's all this one excitement after the other. This is the year of the, I don't know, you call it. And so to call them flops, I question that, because it's not just about whether or not how do you define when it takes off? Is it 1 million people using it? Is it 10 million? Is it 100 million? As you know, Kevin, I look at the numbers. I look at the demand. I look at the user part. So talk about voice and talk about Siri and Google Voice and things like that, and say, hey, wasn't that AI? Wasn't that going to listen to us and do our behest around the house, the smart house? So that's why I call them really a series of low rumbles. We're not walking around with VR headsets. I don't see anybody with them. I see a couple headphones. That's all right. And it's not that maybe I'm sounding a little jaded after all these years, but I keep coming back to hey, if somebody doesn't use the technology, did it happen? And boy, I don't know, Mike, we could probably go through a list of all of those.
Right. I mean, to your point, I think in my mind, we all seem to, as you said, Dan, it wasn't just these kind of step function things that moved us forward 15, 20 years ago when we were tied mostly to Moore's law and then maybe a little bit with Metcalfe's law. Right. All of that is assumed. And I think to your point, I mean, I was always skeptical, I was pretty skeptical about Alexas and HomePods as standalone individual devices. I just want the app on anything with a screen that I want to activate. I don't need one in every room of my house to do quite a bit. I think what's taking longer, Dan, and this is something I've always, right, Dan and I were doing this a long time ago at different companies, but I don't know about you. I remember the skepticism. It's like, well, why would I need a mobile phone, anything beyond a Razor from Motorola? It's the greatest handset ever designed.
Right.
And I think, and we got used to seeing people talking on their phone, walking down the street, and we thought that was really strange. I think the interface of using voice in public is still the thing that has to be overcome. Right now, we're also dealing with a very, I think, pernicious practice that I see. People who walk around on speakerphone. People who walk around on speakerphone when I'm out hiking in the mountains. That drives me insane. So I think we're still worried about how we manage that interface with a screen that may not always be in front of us. And how that works, how we do that more than simply say, what's the next turn that I do, or play the next version of this next episode of the podcast.
Mike,
I think that's where we're struggling.
You are nailing one of the key things. It's not just whether the technology is being used, but who is using it and where. There's a big cultural element. We were testing a smartwatch for a Japanese company 25 years ago, and one of the biggest comebacks on that was, oh, it's ugly. And as a guy, I need my cuff to, hold flat. It's too big. It's all that. And not only that, I'm a guy, and the only thing I can do is either have a tie, then back in those days, or not. And so does it go with my outfit? And so it really, the Japanese couldn't understand why it, because it did all the things. And I'm with you. When you're out in the mountains, enjoy the mountains. But it's that cultural. It takes a while for the cultural part to get accepted. I think you made an excellent point. Where is it appropriate for you to walk around with a smartphone in front, or voice speakerphone in front of you? I can't think of anywhere. But I figure, why not join in the conversation?
But I'm not.
The families at the restaurant, you know, where they're all on their phone and they're not talking to each other because their face
Yeah.
is in front of the screen. It's crazy. Mac, you were going to say something?
Yeah, to Dan's point and Mike's point, there is a social signaling element that I don't think we've fully researched. I go to the gym at 5 a.m. every morning, and there is a gentleman at the gym who, in a very loud voice, the entire time that he's there, is on his headset telling everyone about the next big deal he is working on. And in all honesty, I'm not sure he's talking to anyone but himself.
Right.
Yeah,
But
he's got an
there
audience,
is
but
an element of social signaling present that he thinks makes other people think he is more powerful.
Bingo.
And that's part of this dialogue. How does it play culturally and socially, and what does it signal?
yeah, but if the phone he was talking into could simply, you know, give him a sense of presence, it would say, "Wow, everybody thinks you're a, you know, an a-hole."
Oh boy.
Well, actually, I think a lot of gyms now, at least private ones, when they actually literally somebody will walk over and tell that individual to get headphones, get a speaker, or shut up.
Right.
And I think that's to Mac, to your point, that's part of the evolution, the kind of the cultural signaling and how we deal with that as individuals. That I think, you know, I don't see it as holding back, but as I said, I think once we spread interface capabilities beyond a single screen, and I can now use voice or have audible cues, right, that are conveying information to me as opposed to, you know, a full conversation, you know, I think I've been wondering about, you know, what I'm sure we all have, like, but in reading some of the in between the lines on some of the news coverage, I'm pretty sure that's what Google was waiting for, right? Is they wanted the Google Assistant to get to the point where it could, in real time, reliably help me navigate my life. I could have little side cover, you know, X and Y, and have it generate that, like, hey, you know, generate email, send email to Dan and Kevin. We need a joint discussion on X and Y, some date, you know, in the first week of January, right? And then literally have the assistant just send that email question mark from Mike, hey, when do we want to have this? That, I think, is what Google was waiting. They were waiting for it to get, from what I've read now in the last couple of days, they were waiting for it to get just exactly perfect. Whereas Altman's insight was, what's the worst that could happen? Throw it out there and see if it works. Which I think is to, you know, Martin's point about risk. You know, Altman maybe has that inherent ability to see or assess risk, or doesn't care. But I think that was interesting that Google now is kind of like, it was waiting for it to get to that point where that notion of the assistant, as opposed to, it's a thing I have a conversation with,
right?
Which is what Sam and that part of the OpenAI team managed to do.
But then, Mike, you do want the speakers in every room or with you on your body somewhere if you're going to have an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, I mean, is it the AirPod? I don't know. Is it something that, you know, sits on my? I don't think it's the wrist. I don't think don't talk about neural implants.
Neuralink.
No. I've decided I'm making a rule now. We can't talk about that.
There's a voice in my head. Yeah, I know. I installed it. Right.
How about just in your ear? Just doesn't go to the brain.
Well, it's been 5 years, but there was a Gartner analyst 5 years ago. I wrote this down in one of my notebooks. He actually had a chip implanted in his arm, right? So it would have, like, I think it was like identifying information. I don't, you know,
found, please return to.
Yeah, exactly. It's like is that what you did with what we did with our dogs? Right. But no, he did it as an experiment. I've never followed up to see how that work out. I mean, not even whether the fact that he could get scanned or whatever, but how did your body react to that? You know, what amounts to a foreign body. Let's not go down that path.
Yeah. So Mark, your hands up. What's going on?
So my reaction to this whole thing is that there isn't really a we. We keep hearing, we say once we get to, and there's no collective we. There's the we of those of us who are in this social group. What I think is lacking, and if I had money to give to sponsor an X Prize, I think we need a new input-output interface, because none of them are good enough. Voice has the problems, even though Peter Zion does a great job of recording his podcasts while he's walking in the woods or through nature. But obviously there are the problems in the gym, with other people when they're there. My son, surprisingly, I pull out Siri, he laughs at me, and he goes on and texts on his phone because he texts at 100 miles an hour. And that's what he prefers. Babies now are able to say, I want to see a pig duck, and one will appear on the screen if they're plugged into the right AI. So this idea of interface is really going to be very different, and I think there's going to be some kind of breakthrough, whether it's subvocalization or other stuff, that's going to make a difference.
Well, I have a perspective on that. From the sense mapping practice, which is, if the IO is going to be fully human, then it has to be multimodal, because we're multimodal, right? We see things, we hear things, we feel things, we taste things, we smell things, right? So if you're going to be in a smart environment, you don't want to necessarily only get the inputs from one sensory, right, medium. You want it to come in one that's appropriate to what are you trying to tell me, right? So the Duracell basically said, hey, those coin batteries, kids are sticking those coin batteries in their mouth and they're choking, all right? So what are we going to do about that? And they put a coating on it so that when you put it in your mouth, it tastes like crap, right? And they spit it out, right? That's a really good, use case of, what do you need to do, all right, to, get that to change. So I think that it's not going to be a single breakthrough in terms of IO modality. It's going to be that we start to weave them into a system that's appropriate and is fully human. All right. So that's that's why I think that putting on the goggles isn't the right thing either. All right. For a variety of reasons. All right. Smart environment is going to be multimodal. So.
And I'm just saying it needs more components. I'm not arguing against that. I just say it needs more components that we're still experimenting with, like Google Glass or the thing, or other, or subvocalization or whatever.
And by the way, the Dan Mawney, who is a researcher that I used to work with, that is at Truist now, did a study now probably 15, 17 years ago that was talking about gesturing, right? That you could use American Sign Language, right, to completely communicate quickly to any device in the room, right? Because, you would be using that alternate it was a visual language, and you could ask for things to happen while you're having a different conversation. You could do something with your hand. It's like, hey, robot, bring me a Coke, and it, would go and do that task. And, you wouldn't have to interrupt what you were doing here. So anyway, it's interesting.
Yeah, and I've always thought about something you could put in your pocket and put your hand in your pocket and start texting on without looking at anything, and just doing this. So you could be doing that while you were having conversations, while you were doing other stuff.
Are you texting, or are you just happy to see me?
Exactly.
So I'm going to take a hard right turn here. Elsie posted a question I think is interesting. About where are we with ethics? All right, I think I could apply that in a number of domains, but Elsie, frame up the area of ethics that you're interested in, all right, for our discussion today.
Okay.
Hey, Martin, fly safe, my friend. Glad to have you with us. We'll see you when you get back in Raleigh. Elsie.
Okay, so the news media, the mass media, is full of warnings that AI has been accelerating and at a rate that no one could have foreseen, and with possibly dire consequences. Nobody knows where it's going to go and the implications for essentially the well-being of humanity.
Mhm.
And this is a question that, I mean, 5 years ago, I helped curate a conference that included the question of the role of engineers in the well-being of the planet and business and et cetera. And of course, AI was a topic 5 years ago, ethics in AI in particular. And I don't see, I'm curious to know from this group, what's the state of it? We're talking about technology, I get that, but what about the impacts of technology and where's the governor, if you will, that keeps it on track for positive impacts, particularly as it relates to AI in this frenzy? What's the inflection point that could make a difference in the direction of AI as a force for good, more good than not?
There was recently a piece that David Bray was putting out. He's the former CIO of the FCC, among other things. And he was saying that, Turing test, to determine whether something was sentient was insufficient. And so he proposed some things that would talk about, what would that test be, and did we need to include some of the things that you're talking about? Do we need to include, intentionality and, ethics and its duty of care, right, to, the creatures that, created it? And I got into this side conversation about, you're familiar with Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, right? That, you can't cause harm to a human, and you cannot, you want to, preserve your own being, and, that there's a, through inaction, you can't let harm come to a human being, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, there's this hierarchy, but every time Asimov writes about it, right, relative to the book, I, Robot, right, is the pronoun is wrong, right? Is that we're entering the era where we need to think about we, robot, okay? Because it's not the one-to-one interaction, it's the system to humanity interaction that needs to be more carefully considered. And that's actually, beginning to enter into the conversation, Elsie. And I think that we're expanding the context. The technology is evolving so rapidly that it does not have a governor. And in fact, given the releases that are taking place every day, the systems are beginning to self-improve themselves, right? This is the point where exponential, gets on top of exponential, and we start to not understand how the system actually works, right? Because it's recursively improving itself, and therefore we're not involved in the programming. So I'm very interested in the data training sets, right? I think that that's foundationally one of the key things is, well, what is it learning, right? What's it learning about, right? And that we need to be, concerned about. The largest data training set on the planet is mainland China, right? And, the no privacy constraints, none of that kind of stuff. We will all be recipients of that data training set in other parts of our lives. And the question is, do we want to import that the way we imported TikTok? All right. There are outcomes. I'll stop there. I saw some other hands up. Mac, I think you're next.
Yeah, real quickly, and thank you, Kevin. And Elsie, I think that's one of the critical questions that we have to deal with. But I'm also seeing, yes, it is self-improving, but some examples now exist where it is self-destructive, where the information being fed to it continues to depreciate its value. And so watching how it learns, improves, or corrupts, I think is part of the conversation. The other thought is whether there needs to be some type, and we mentioned this, some type of evaluative system, perhaps following along the FDA lines. So phase 1 of drug approval, does it do harm? Phase 2 of drug approval, what is the efficacy of it? Is it accurate? Does it do what it's supposed to do? And then phase 3, within subpopulations, are there differences in the efficacy? So some way of evaluating and scoring it so that you know this is a 1 or this is a 5 on those different or alternative criteria is going to have to be developed at some point, because it is gaining its own independence, for good or bad.
And if I'm hearing you, the last couple of comments, it's about if there is an inflection point, it is the regulatory system, whether it's the FCC or the FDA model. But the inflection point that where there may be some hope of making a difference, whatever the criteria are, it would be governmental.
It would only, and it will only manifest in places where the government has an interest in regulating it. There will be many, many places on the planet that will get infrastructure and will not regulate it, and it will leak out from the borders because, you know, the internet is borderless. Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, I think at least part of this, there are going to be these classifications, I think, of the use for controls command systems. There's a set of, I think, you know, you could look at somebody like NIST or UL, right? It's like, okay, if you're going to have it run your fast food empire or these farm, you know, agricultural systems, medical systems, X and Y, there's going to be a, you know, as I said, I think they may be developing it already at NIST, but,
yeah,
you know, an underwriter's lab like thing. Stuart.
Oh, I'm just thinking about the regulation that you're talking about. You know, there's going to be an FAIA, you know, Federal AI Administration, and that's going to be a necessity. But I don't think anybody really fully understands what that means yet, and so we're going to go through a period, a little challenging period. By the way, did the people on this call, did they track the OpenAI implosion that happened for what, 3 or 4 days?
Oh, yeah, we had a whole call.
That was awesome.
You had a whole call on it? Yeah. Oh my God, that was the craziest thing to watch in real time. But isn't it interesting that they had set up a group to basically stop the entire operation after raising billions and billions of dollars? It just didn't seem to make any sense at all.
In fact, did you see the quote?
You can't mix a not-for-profit with a for-profit mission. And
well,
right.
Stu, I have to say, it did give evidence that Elon does pay attention to some of the more, you know, prosaic parts of business. When he was the one, I guess, before the end of the year or after the 6-month mark, was like, hey, wait a minute. How does a nonprofit get a business valuation of $13 billion?
Right.
Why aren't we all doing this? I thought that was actually a very insightful remark.
There is an institution that does that. It's called the church. Okay, can raise that kind of money and not be taxed. Go ahead.
But going back to Elsie's question, that may have been an example of you can't mix progress with ethics, because progress is often unethical. It has nothing to do with people. It has to do with the universe. It has to do, people are nothing in the universe, and we just see it in the context of these of this small thing, people. And usually it's a subset of people, that's us, the people who think well or who do this or who live in a particular kind of governmental environment. So those things may not be compatible, ethics and progress, or technological progress.
Well, it's a perspective. I'm going to bore a couple of you because you may have heard this story before, but I had an advisory council meeting when I was back at IBM where I took some people out of China. One of the best thing you can do if you're working with executives in China is don't go to China to visit them. They desperately want to get out of China. So I took them to Singapore, right? And we were telling them about this new technology called a firewall, all right? And I said, oh, and they started, the more we described it, they were getting excited. They kind of, oh, this is great. Oh yes, we want this. And about 10 minutes in the description, we realized that what they were imagining was the firewall being pointed toward the outside world, that we can keep out all this information, right? As opposed to, being able to use it at an enterprise level to, keep the intranet, all right, that we have and our stuff, proprietary. And interestingly enough, right, we will probably get to the point where we're going to want to put this, do the same thing, because if we have a regulatory regime about what we think is appropriate, not appropriate, we're going to have to start to point firewalls outside of the country that has, restrictions, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to do that, is you're going to have to keep it out. And that's a change. That will be a stark change in terms of, the way that we're handling ourselves today. Anyway.
I think there's something related in that where generative AI gets its training data sets is really important. And it's only recently that we've started to hear some of the book writers, some of the news sources say, hey, wait a minute, you've been scraping everything that we have and you're making money off of it and you're not paying us any, and so on and so forth. That's our intellectual property. So sometimes the business side, but sometimes the personal side. You've been taking my private conversations and using it to build your system. So I think that firewall concept, Kevin, is applicable today.
Well, the only about, most recent calculation I was able to get is 7%. 7% of human knowledge, the way that we understand it, is available on the open World Wide Web, right? The rest of it is behind a paywall, behind a firewall, in a SCIF, on a single drive, right? And is not accessible, right, to be scraped or used as training data in any way, shape, or form. Which means, right, if we think that this is a general representation of what we know as a species, we're deluding ourselves because it doesn't.
Isn't that a similar number? I'm not a cosmologist, but the dark matter, Hubble has helped us to quantify how much we've been missing. Isn't that the same thing about what we've understood about the universe so far? I mean, I'm nothing wrong with that, but
for my birthday, I just got, and I've wanted one since I was a kid. I just got a keyboard-based synthesizer, right? And it has a 400-page manual, right? It's going to take me a long time to understand all the functionality inside this thing, right? I may never master the instrument, right? I was looking at the presets, and it said, oh, well, it has 8 banks with 128 patches in every bank. All right. That means there are 1,000 different instruments inside this thing, right? Just by turning the knob. Right. And I said, oh boy, this is going to be, this is going to be interesting.
I want to add one thing, Elsie, to Elsie's question. And one other thing I was thinking, Elsie, is, I mean, honestly, for your clients or any client I might have, it's like, when we talk about ethics, it's like, oh, do you already have a code of ethics for your existing business? Right. And a lot of people will point at their mission statement, right? We make great products that makes the world and everybody happy. That's not a code of ethics, and I think that's the first place to start. And I think it's why a lot of people don't. I mean, I've seen this in the work when I was doing when I was at Gartner. We do surveys, and all the people who, any audience in any industry who had the most experience using machine learning and AI always had the biggest fear. The people who were the most experienced with it were the ones who were the most concerned about it. And over 3/4 of them would always say, I'm pretty sure our company's probably violating some ethical canon somewhere. I just don't know where it is. And I don't know what ours is, because it's very hard to tell the board, we could use this AI engine and increase our profits by 30%. We could also then hasten the death rate of a certain percentage of our audience by being that successful with the product. And I think a lot of this comes down to is I think business leaders want somebody to hand them a code of ethics. And what they're really saying is, I need a get out of jail free card, right? For me and my board. And I think the lack of that, I think if they have some sort of an ethical canon, and by that I don't mean just being compliant with existing state and federal law. It's like, we don't make money the following X ways. We try not to be predatory. Whatever. I think there are places to start, but I think a lot of people will be building their ethical handbook or whatever for their company while they're looking at this complex technology, because I don't think most companies have them.
Yeah, most of the time when we invoke the notion of ethics and business practices and that whole thing, is we're talking about the boundaries of which, we start to exceed what we think is acceptable as some collective group, all right, that you're part of, versus conversations about values and shared interests, where that's expressing intention about what we want to do together. That's positive. Ethics normally is showing a boundary layer of where you're going to stray and you're going to violate, right, ethics, right? So it has a definite negative cast to it, but they're all part of the same continuum, right? In terms of expressive capacity of an organization or a system.
Well,
Elsie, this
I
is
just
a really
wanted to
interesting area.
close that loop for a second, Kevin, and that's consistent with what we found, is that when there's law and regulation, and most corporations are willing to pay fines rather than adhere to what we might consider law or ethics, then there's ethics codes, and then there's values, and then there's felt motivation. And in our experience, until value systems or ethics systems are part of a felt motivation consistently in the culture, they're not going to last. So
Yeah.
that's why our work is really delving more in deeper to the felt experience. But in the
100%.
meantime, ethics are the presenting issue.
Yeah, I mean, normally the foundation of, well, why do we have a law, is somebody did something, right, or an organization did something that we would prefer not happen again. So we're going to instantiate it as a law, right, that you can now violate, all right, at your, peril. And as you say, if you're in certain parts of the legal system, you're willing to violate, to the point where you're willing to pay the penalty because the profit exceeded the penalty, right? And you did a calculation. Well, a little sketchy, right? Interestingly enough, there was a person who was on the call who's not with us, right? As we get here to the top of the air, Eric Jacomstaller at Vivaldi Partners. And he recently, he's an expert witness in trials regarding brand value. And it was in a case where it was a shoe company. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but Walmart had made a copy of the shoe and brought it to market, knew they were violating, the trademark, but the penalty for it was, that they were going to make a lot more money than whatever they're going to have to pay in court for this. So they walked in, and Eric had a new calculation. It was a new system that basically said, well, not only did you deprive the other company of the sales, of their brand, you damaged their brand, and you deprive them of future sales because of that brand damage. Let me show you what those calculations are, right? They got through the trial. They said, oh, nobody's ever seen this, methodology before. It's a bunch of garbage, right? Judge looked at it over time, and they said, no, it's valid, right? I've looked at it, makes sense, all right? And the award was 5 times their, what they made on those shoes, right? Now, going forward, right, if you decide to do that, all right, and you use Eric's methodology, you're going to think twice about whether it's profitable, right, to make that move. Now it probably isn't. And so that's really good for anyone who is an originator of something that's unique in the world, right? That it's less likely that you would have an incentive to copy it. But ethics? No, that's just really strong brand valuation calculation, right? That, you know, held up the day. So, all right, so I'm going to go around. It's the top of the hour. The holiday mouse says, right? Yep, it's the time to kick back. We're not going to be together until January. We're going to take some time off. I want to thank Mike for being a great co-host with me this year. He's brought some great voices to the table, some great guests, and we value every one of you, right, as participants. It's been a great year. Dip into the library and listen to some playbacks. We've had some really good people, all right, on with us. Mike, your thoughts as we close out the year?
Well, I think it's everybody on the call and people listening in. I really do appreciate and I'm thankful for the ability to have great conversations once a week with folks like you. And, you know, as much as anything, I find it inspiring, and it also does make me stop and look at a few things I might be working on with a different eye. And that's pretty hard to put any kind of a price tag on. So thank you all for joining. I think it's been a very ending up the last couple of calls as we did with Kyle, giving us the exuberant and ebullient view of generative AI. And, you know, you got to keep playing with the tool. I get it. But I think the more we can in the coming year, as Elise did earlier, kind of stop and like, okay, wait a minute. We've heard about these issues around the technology itself and its potential byproducts. I think that's where more time's going to be spent. I think a lot of people are still in the gee whiz phase. Gee, isn't that cool? You know, it's like, and I did that where I said, oh, let me write something a day about XY using this tool. And did a lot of volume. It was great. A lot of volume. It wasn't anything I would have want to put my real name against. And I think we're at that phase where we'll play with it. But if we don't keep an eye on the potential byproducts, which I think at least is a thing. I think a lot of people were worried about AI and ethics a couple of years ago. And I think what happened since last November and now has completely derailed a lot of those conversations, because I think people just look at the potential. So you didn't ask for me to do a stem winder, Kevin, but it's going to be an interesting coming year, and I hope everybody has a great holiday break.
That's great. I feel like these calls for me are like, you know, an ongoing graduate seminar, right? That, you know, it keeps me, you know, intellectually refreshed, and that just means that all of you are intellectually refreshing. So thank you very much. All right, I wish you all the best, all right, for the holiday as you celebrate it, and we'll see you in the new year. Cheers.
See ya.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. It was wonderful.